If someone had told me that at the age of 77 I'd spend 2 months in a nursing home, I would have laughed in their face. Me? The man who still mowed his own lawn and drove cross-country to see his grandkids? Impossible. Yet there I was, surrounded by strangers in hospital gowns, wondering how my independent life had come to this. What began as my personal nightmare transformed into the most profound classroom I've ever entered. The lessons I learned didn't just change how I view my remaining years, they revealed what truly matters at any age. Today, I'll share 7 priceless insights, especially lesson number 5, which I wish I'd known 40 years ago. These aren't just an old man's ramblings, they're truths that could save you from the regrets I've witnessed in the eyes of my fellow residents. If this resonates with you, please hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. Now, let me take you back to the day everything changed. It all started with a simple fall in my bathroom. At 77, even minor accidents can lead to major life changes. The doctor looked me straight in the eye and said, "Mr. Thompson, you'll need rehabilitation before you can go home." Just like that, my independent life was put on hold. I remember the day my son David drove me to Pine Grove Nursing Center. The smell hit me first, that unmistakable blend of disinfectant and cafeteria food. My heart sank. This wasn't supposed to be my life. My room was small but clean, with a hospital bed and a window overlooking a garden. My roommate Walter was 82 and recovering from a stroke. He barely spoke, but his eyes followed me as I unpacked. That first night was the longest of my life. I lay awake thinking about my house sitting empty, wondering if I'd ever return to normal life. I felt trapped, forgotten, and terrified. But something unexpected happened over the following days. As I began physical therapy and joined the daily routines, I started seeing the nursing home differently. It wasn't just a medical facility. It was a community of people with incredible life stories and wisdom to share. Maybe you're facing this decision for yourself or a loved one right now. What I learned during those 2 months might just change how you think about aging and what truly matters in life. Lesson number 1. Relationships are your most valuable asset. 3 days after arriving, I noticed something that would change my perspective forever. During visiting hours, some residents lit up as family members arrived with flowers and homemade cookies. Others sat alone, watching the doors with hopeful expressions that slowly faded as the hours passed. That's when I met Margaret. At 83, she had been at Pine Grove for 3 years. Her room was neat but impersonal. No family photos, no cards. When I asked about her visitors, she looked down at her hands and quietly said, "My son lives in Seattle. He's very busy. My daughter, well, we had a disagreement years ago. I haven't seen either of them in 3 years." The contrast was heartbreaking. Residents with regular visitors seemed healthier, more engaged, and simply happier. Those without connections often withdrew into themselves. Did you know that according to the National Institute on Aging, nearly 28% of Americans over 65 live alone? And loneliness increases the risk of premature death by 26%. I saw this reality playing out before my eyes every day. What I realized is that we spend decades chasing careers and accumulating possessions. But in the end, what truly matters isn't what you owned or achieved. It's who still shows up when you can no longer offer anything in return. So here's my advice. Nurture your existing relationships now, not when you have time. Call that old friend you've been meaning to reconnect with. Resolve family conflicts while you can. Pride is poor company in old age. When was the last time you called someone just to tell them they matter to you? Lesson number 2. Health is wealth. No money can buy. During my second week, I met Richard, an 81-year-old former CEO who once ran a chain of successful hotels. His room was in the premium wing, but all his money couldn't help him hold a spoon steady enough to feed himself. I watched him one morning struggling to bring a simple spoonful of oatmeal to his mouth. His hands trembled so badly that most of it spilled before reaching his lips. The frustration in his eyes was unbearable. "I would give every penny I have," he told me later, "just to be able to walk to the bathroom by myself at night." Dr. Martinez, the medical director, explained it perfectly. The choices you make in your 40s, 50s, and 60s determine how you'll live in your 80s and 90s. Exercise, nutrition, stress management, these aren't just about living longer. They're about the quality of those extra years. The truth is stark. No amount of money can buy back your ability to climb stairs, enjoy a meal independently, or take a walk without fear of falling. Here are simple habits you can start today. Move your body daily, even if it's just a 10-minute walk. Eat real food, the kind your grandparents would recognize. Get proper sleep. Manage stress through whatever works for you. And get regular checkups. Catching issues early makes all the difference. Did you know that just 10 minutes of daily walking can add up to 3 years to your life expectancy? Your future self is depending on the choices you make right now. Lesson 3. Material possessions eventually lose their meaning. The day I moved into Pine Grove, I had to decide what to bring from my 4-bedroom house into a 120-square-foot room. 60 years of collecting, buying, and saving all had to be distilled down to a handful of items. My son stood in my living room, notepad in hand. "What do you absolutely need, Dad?" he asked. I looked around at the antique desk that had been my father's, the china cabinet full of my late wife's collection, the bookshelf overflowing with books. In the end, I brought some clothes, a few photos, my reading glasses, and a small clock my wife had given me on our 40th anniversary. That was it. Everything else suddenly seemed unimportant. What surprised me most was how quickly I adjusted to living with less. Within days, I stopped thinking about all those possessions. What I did miss were the memories attached to them, not the items themselves. There's a Swedish concept called dödstädning, or death cleaning, the practice of gradually downsizing as you age so you don't leave the burden to your children. But I think it's valuable at any age. Here's what I learned. We don't own possessions. Eventually, they own us. They demand maintenance, storage, insurance, and mental energy. And in the end, most of what we accumulate becomes a burden, either to us or to those we leave behind. If you could only take 5 items with you to your next phase of life, what would they be? Lesson 4. Independence is a precious gift. My 3rd day at Pine Grove was the hardest. I needed a shower but couldn't manage alone with my hip injury. A nursing assistant named Carlos came in to help me. At 77, I had never needed help bathing since I was a child. The humiliation was overwhelming. I sat on the shower chair, naked and vulnerable, as this stranger, kind as he was, washed my back. I felt like I had lost the last shred of my dignity. What hit me hardest wasn't the physical dependence, but the sudden loss of choice. When to wake up, when to eat, when to bathe, all these decisions were now made according to the facility's schedule, not mine. Sarah, one of the night nurses, shared something profound during a late-night chat. The hardest adjustment for most people isn't the physical limitations, she said. It's the loss of autonomy. We try to give residents as many choices as possible, but it's never the same as living on your own terms. I realized that independence isn't just about physical ability. It's about dignity and self-worth. When you can no longer decide when to eat breakfast or which shirt to wear, something fundamental changes in how you see yourself. Here's what I recommend. Maintain your physical strength through regular exercise. Adapt your home early to accommodate potential limitations. Bathroom grab bars and remove trip hazards can keep you independent years longer. And practice asking for help with small things now, so it's less traumatic when you need help with bigger things. What steps are you taking today to maintain your independence tomorrow? Lesson 5. Happiness comes from simple things. The most remarkable person I met was Martha, an 85-year-old woman confined to a wheelchair with severe arthritis. Despite constant pain, Martha was unfailingly cheerful. One morning, I found her by the window watching the sunrise. "I've watched 31,025 sunrises in my life," she told me proudly. "Give or take a few for cloudy days, and each one is a miracle." When I asked how she stayed so positive despite her circumstances, she looked surprised. "I don't focus on what I've lost," she said. "I enjoy what I still have. I can see. I can hear birds singing. I can feel the sun on my face. Why would I waste time being sad about things I can't change?" Martha practiced what she called her 3 good things ritual. Every night she identified 3 positive moments from her day, no matter how small. A kind word from a nurse, the taste of fresh strawberries, the cardinal that visited her window. I started practicing Martha's ritual, and it changed my outlook dramatically. Instead of focusing on my limitations, I began noticing small pleasures: the warmth of sunshine, the satisfaction of making progress in therapy, the taste of my morning coffee. What small joy have you experienced today, but perhaps not fully appreciated? These aren't trivial pleasures. They're the very substance of a happy life. Lesson 6. Forgiveness brings peace to yourself. In the room across from mine lived Eleanor, a 90-year-old woman with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. She rarely had visitors and seemed angry most of the time. One night, I heard sobbing from her room. She was sitting up in bed, clutching an old photograph of 2 young women with their arms around each other. "My sister," she explained. "She died last year." Eleanor shared that they had fought over their mother's estate 20 years earlier. Harsh words were exchanged, and eventually they stopped speaking entirely. "I always thought there would be time to make amends," she said. "Then I got the call that she was gone." The regret in her voice was devastating. Dr. Wilson, the facility psychologist, later explained that unresolved anger is common among elderly patients. "We see the physical effects of long-term bitterness," he said. "Increased inflammation, higher blood pressure, weakened immune function. Holding grudges literally makes people sick." What struck me was how Eleanor's anger hadn't punished her sister. It had only punished Eleanor herself. For 20 years, she carried that burden, and now she would carry it forever. The process of forgiveness isn't easy, but it's essential. Recognize that forgiveness is for your peace, not the other person's benefit. Decide to release the resentment, even if it takes time. Is there someone you need to forgive? Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Lesson 7. Each day is a gift. During my 6th week, I befriended Frank, a 79-year-old former teacher with a great sense of humor. One Thursday evening, he was in particularly good spirits, showing me photos of his grandchildren and telling animated stories. The next morning at breakfast, his seat was empty. Frank had passed away peacefully in his sleep. The news hit our community hard. Just hours earlier, he had been laughing, eating ice cream, making plans to watch a baseball game that weekend. None of us, including Frank, had any indication it would be his last day. The chaplain held a small memorial service. "Frank reminded us of an essential truth," he said. "None of us knows which day will be our last. Our task is not to know when our time will end, but to make sure it's well spent while it lasts." This unpredictability isn't something to fear. It's a reminder to live intentionally. We often postpone joy and connection, assuming there will always be more time. "One day I'll reconnect with old friends," we say. "One day I'll tell my children what they mean to me." But sometimes one day never comes. Instead of a to-do list, I now keep a "don't delay" list. Experiences that shouldn't wait for some future perfect moment. Telling someone I love them. Forgiving an old hurt. Experiencing simple joys without postponement. If today were your last day, what would you regret not having said or done? These 7 lessons transformed my outlook on life. I left Pine Grove after 2 months, returning home with a repaired hip and a renewed spirit. I'm no longer afraid of growing old, I'm only afraid of wasting the time I have left. No matter your age, whether you're 30, 50, or 80, these truths apply equally. The choices you make today shape the life you'll live tomorrow. Please share this video with someone you care about and tell me in the comments which lesson resonated most with you. Life is short. Live meaningfully, love without hesitation, and never take any day for granted. Because in the end, it's not the years in your life that count, but the life in your years.